All right. All right, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our Med Mentors at UCLA Drew collab. Before we start, I want to share a link with you all, which contains the itinerary for today, as well as a bunch of resources from Med Mentors at UCLA. All right. Okay, so welcome. My name is Kalechi, and I am a second-year med student here at the Drew UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine medical education program. And I want to welcome you all for taking the time out to be in our audience and provide questions for us. And I also want to thank our 5 wonderful panelists who took the time out of their day to tell you more about their journey and about the Drew program at UCLA. But before we start and introduce our panelists, I want to share my screen with you all and just show you guys the Drew webpage. And the link is also in the itinerary if you want to follow along. All right, so just to give an overview of Drew. So Drew is a program within the David Geffen School of Medicine geared towards serving underserved and underrepresented population. So each year, 28 students are enrolled into the Drew program. So they're duly enrolled into the Drew and then UCLA medicine program. And 4 of the 28 students are also duly enrolled into the Prime program. And Prime, I know a couple weeks ago, did a one event like this as well. So if you're interested in Prime, feel free to check their webinar out on the Med Mentors website. Anyway, so this is the Drew webpage, and it tells you about the admissions requirements, which is I think it's specifically important this year with all with the COVID pandemic. There are a lot of changes with AMCAS and Drew. So just check it out when you apply, and they're also they also list people. They also list the contact information for you guys to reach out if you have any questions. Here's the website. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, so and next we'll introduce our wonderful panelists. So I asked that each panelist tell us their name, their hometown, their undergrad institution, as well as activities that they did in undergrad. And lastly, what they did for a gap year, if they took a gap year, and what other degrees they have. I guess at first we can start with Nonye.
Okay, let's hope I say everything. So hi guys, I'm Nonye. MS2. I'm one of the 4 that Kalechi was talking about in the Prime Drew program. I am from Rancho Cucamonga, California, which is like an hour east of LA, if you know where that is. In terms of undergrad, I went to MIT, so I spent 4 years in Boston. I double majored in mechanical engineering and biology, so kind of with a focus on biomedical devices and things like that. In terms of activities that I did leading up to like med school, I was really involved with like our National Society of Black Engineers chapter at MIT. So doing a lot of outreach to underserved communities and trying to bring them into STEM and kind of just support Black engineers throughout our undergrad and like high school as well, because they have like similar like maps and similar like undergrad pre-med societies, but for engineering. Also was a part of Camp Kesem, which I know UCLA also has a chapter of. So working with kids whose parents have or have had cancer and kind of putting on this summer camp for them, but as well as supporting them throughout their years whenever they need help, whenever they need someone to talk to about what's going on, we're there for them. And I think it was really cool because it's like a niche group of kids that like you don't always think about, like because they themselves aren't sick, but they get really impacted by their parents' health as well. And then outside of that, I also did a lot of like dorm culture things at MIT. Like all our dorms are really like interesting. The way we get placed in them is interesting. Like students kind of get to choose where they get to live more so than just getting placed places. And I did a lot of leadership around that and trying to make sure that voices were heard, especially when people tried to like kind of close down dorms or things that tended to be cheaper and supported underrepresented students at our school. So kind of advocating in that way. And I think overall Drew's mission spoke to me because, you know, being first gen. My parents are immigrants from Nigeria. Like I've seen what healthcare looks like there, but also what healthcare looks like here. And it's like sad that in rural parts of a third world country, you still like people aren't receiving care, but then you have that happening in like LA and just some places that you just wouldn't imagine that people aren't still able to access care. So that was kind of what drew me to Drew and kind of why I said, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Nonye. So up next, we have Mildred.
Yeah. Hello, my name's Mildred. So I'm a Drew MSTP student. Currently, there's 3 of us that are Drew MSTP. So what that means is we're part of the Drew program, but we're also getting our PhD. So I'm a 3rd-year medical student and a 3rd-year PhD, which means I've been at UCLA Drew and MSTP for 5 years. Okay, so I am from San Diego. I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad. I majored in biology with an emphasis in immunology and pathogenesis, and a minor in anthropology. So during undergrad, I was pre-med, and I got involved with the biology scholars program, which is kind of a similar admission to Drew, which is to help historically underrepresented students succeed in the sciences. And through that, I got really involved in mentorship, kind of the tutoring groups, social activities, and coordinating with leadership to see what students needed in the program. And I also did a lot of dancing, so like salsa, Lindy Hop, swing dancing, and all of that. And so I ended up taking 3 years as between undergrad and medical school. And the reason for that was because my mom was diagnosed with cancer during undergrad. So balancing all of that plus trying to study for the MCAT, and it was a lot. So I decided to kind of use those 3 years to study for the MCAT. And then because I got exposure to research during undergrad, I got a full-time research position as a lab technician to see if that's actually something that I wanted to pursue. And well, ultimately, my mom passed away. But I took the MCAT and I figured out that I loved research. So I applied to MD PhD programs like all over the US and to Drew. I think that was the only MD program I applied to. And I came here for my interview. I loved it. And like the mission is just like serving the underserved, helping disadvantaged groups. And because of everything that I went through with my mom and seeing the care that she got as a Latina woman who couldn't communicate with her doctors, that's what really drew me to Drew, to kind of one day give back. And also because I'm very interested in research, I'm currently doing immunotherapy for melanoma. So in the future, I want to get involved in clinical trials, and there's a huge disparity in clinical trials. Most of the people that are enrolled tend to be Caucasian, tend to be at higher, more privileged institutions, and they're not very diverse. So in terms of my research, I want to kind of get involved in clinical trials and make them more accessible and equitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mildred. Up next, we have Michaela.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Michaela. I'm a 4th-year medical student. I'm also in the Prime program as well. So I'm applying in obstetrics and gynecology during this upcoming application cycle. So we'll see how all of that unfolds. I took 2 years off during medical school, actually, the first of which was to pursue a year dedicated to research, exploring the health concerns of youth impacted by sex trafficking. And I also did a master's in public health at Johns Hopkins. So as far as my background, I'm from Oakland. I went to Stanford for my undergraduate degree. While there, I was involved in a lot of activities centered around reproductive health. So I was a counselor at our Sexual Health Peer Resource Center. And then I was also an HIV test counselor at our Student Health Center, as well as a local free clinic. I also did research while in undergrad, exploring the reproductive health needs of young women who were in a local juvenile detention center. And then as far as gap years, so I took 3 as well. I worked in clinical research at Mount Sinai in their adolescent health center, doing research on HPV and the Gardasil vaccine. And then I worked as a reproductive health specialist at Planned Parenthood. So I did things like pregnancy options counseling, and then also serving as a support person for patients during their procedures. So I'd say overall, I'm really committed to health equity and plan to serve communities that are marginalized. And so my passion for reproductive health, as you can see, began very early in my journey and really is what informed my decision to pursue medical school at all. So thinking back, like historically on medicine, as well as the field of obstetrics and gynecology, it's really rooted in injustice and trauma. If we even look at like the surgical procedures and the instruments that we use today, a lot of that was developed as a result of experiments on Black women, on slaves. So I really feel like my positionality as a future doctor and the power that's inherent in being a physician is something that will really allow me to make space for women and communities that are often silenced. And so I made the decision to pursue Drew for my training because their mission really aligned with those values.
Thank you, Michaela.
Yeah,
Up next, we have Alex.
Hello, everyone. So I am an MS2. And let's see, my hometown, I grew up in a very small town called Planada, which is in the Central Valley of California. It's near Merced, if anyone knows where that is. I went to undergrad at UC San Diego, and some of the things that I did there that were very memorable to me was I was part of Flying Samaritans, where we would take like a once-a-month trip to Ensenada, Mexico, just we're so close to the border, and do a free clinic for the locals there. And being like the one person who spoke Spanish most of the time on those trips, I spent the whole day kind of translating for physicians. And I think that experience especially kind of highlighted, kind of ended up, one of the reasons why I ended up at Drew. Other than that, I also did research. So I did a couple years of research. Interesting enough, it was like breast cancer research. And I think that was when I initially noted that I like really enjoyed research, just like Mildred, I guess. And another thing that I did in terms of fun in undergrad, I actually played on my school's competitive League of Legends team. So I've always like really loved video games. I know Kalechi's probably laughing because she always makes fun of me, and so does Nonye. But yeah, that started during that time. Then following my time at UCSD, I took 4 years off in between then and med school. I had to take some time off mostly because I had, during undergrad, had gone through kind of like a major depressive episode, and my grades kind of took a dip, and there was no way that I'd be able to apply with the grades that I had at the time. So I moved actually to Philadelphia, did some research at UPenn, and interesting enough, it was on respiratory virology, and so given the current times, it's kind of interesting how it all came back around. Spent a couple years there, really enjoyed it. I still really love research. Basic science research is like what I love to do. After that, I did a postbac at UCSF. And then when I was applying, I did another year of research at Stanford. There, I was looking more so at like neurodegenerative diseases. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to why I chose Drew, it kind of just all comes, I mean, it's like kind of what everyone has already said. I grew up in like a very rural part of California that's very underserved. I think if you ever look at, I remember reading a few papers where like the Central Valley and the Inland Empire have like a big shortage of physicians, and especially diverse physicians. And I kind of echo what Mildred said, like going through the experiences of my mom, who doesn't even know how to read or write Spanish, but had to somehow communicate with her doctors, and having me as like a 10-year-old translating for her. Those kind of things really, just stuck to me, and why I really chose Drew and the mission.
Thank you, Alex. And I think you're being a little bit too humble. Can you tell me your ranking? Your ranking in League of Legends. What are you ranking in the world?
Oh my God! So I played on my school's. I played on UCLA's teams actually last year as an MS1, and I am top like 500 out of a game that's like crazy. I mean, if you ever play the game, it's competitive, but it's like the 0.001 percentile. So it's a fun thing to do. Kill some time.
All right, thank you, Alex. And last but not least, we have Rocio.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rocio. I grew up in LA mostly. I went to Cal State Northridge, and my degree is in psychology. Most of my time at CSUN, actually, I spent doing a lot of like clinical experience stuff. I, for 2 years, did clinical experience at a local hospital, and that really solidified my passion in medicine, and really kind of gave me a headway of going into medical school, of which things I really liked and which things I really didn't. So if you have the opportunity to do that, I really, really recommend you give it ample time. So I did dedicate 2 years of my undergrad doing that, and that was invaluable, completely invaluable. I did a tiny bit of research as an undergrad, but most of my time I spent being involved in education. And one program I was involved in that I really thought was valuable was called Peer Health Exchange. And so what you would do is we would teach. We would go to local under-resourced high schools and do different topics in health. So we did addiction and pregnancy prevention and things like that. And a lot of these schools just don't really have access to health education, and so we were able to provide that at the undergraduate level. I also danced in college, and that's something that I loved and just kind of gave me a break from school. So I was really happy about that. I actually applied to medical school right after undergrad. Had very little mentorship really going through medical school. Kind of was just flying by the seat of my pants and thinking I knew what I was doing. Really, I didn't. And so my first application to medical school was unsuccessful. Afterwards, I applied for a post-bac program that UCLA actually offers. DGSOM actually has a post-bac program for reapplicants. It's a very small cohort, but it's a wonderful program. And I did that for 2 years after my undergraduate degree. And I also taught for 4 years. I taught science and math full-time at a middle school. And then I reapplied, and now I'm at Drew. And Drew, I think it's already been said, but specifically my focus was really trying to, become a physician that could really serve underserved communities, particularly the undocumented community. And that's where most of my motivation for going to medical school comes from. And so I'm happy to be here and happy to share stories with you guys.
Thank you, Rocio. And thank you all 5 panelists. Honestly, sitting here and listening to your stories, it humbles me. It makes me so proud to be in such company, a part of the Drew program. And I don't know, I can't say this enough, but like hearing my Drew, classmates' stories, and I don't know, there's something, I guess, je ne sais quoi about being a part of the Drew program. It just brings life to me. And everybody has a different passion, but each passion is so important to that person, and I love hearing it. So thank you all for sharing your story. And I guess on that note, kind of a segue into our first question. So I know a lot of you touched upon this question, why Drew? But more specifically, I guess addressing our audience, there are a lot of med schools out there, but specifically why, what does Drew have that other schools don't? Why did you choose Drew over other schools? If anybody can elaborate a little bit more on that.
I guess just one thing, I'm sure that people will have plenty to add, but one really nice thing about Drew is, one, it has a very specific mission. And so if that mission is dear to your heart, it's a place you definitely want to be. And what's really nice about Drew is that it's a small cohort within a giant cohort, which is the UCLA cohort. So I believe in my cohort, there's only like 26 of us that are part of the Drew program that encompass the larger UCLA class. And so really just having that small group and a whole set of faculty really just dedicated to really tiny cohorts really not only helps you get through medical school, but it also helps you kind of see your projects come to life. Like if you're really interested in something, you have a whole team of people that are dedicated to helping you achieve that is independent of UCLA. So that part I think is very unique about the Drew program, and really kind of helps you get through medical school and build these long lasting relationships that you wouldn't really get at like a bigger school. So yeah.
I also was really attracted. I think a number of medical schools really try to invoke service and having like a servant leader mentality as like a part of their clinical curriculum and care. But I think for me, what made Drew different was that Drew was a place that was established from the community. So it wasn't like, oh, we have this healthcare facility and these people who want to come in and provide this care. Like Drew was established as a result of people feeling like they weren't receiving care that was adequate and appropriate for them following the Watts riots. So like, I think when you look at a program that's really walking the walk, talking the talk, Drew is one that is doing that. And I think that was really evident for me on interview day when you even look to see where Drew is located. Because I think that a lot of times there are medical schools that will go into the community, which is great, but they won't actually be physically located in a position or in a space where they're actively like serving the people. So I think for me, just knowing that history and then seeing how that's manifested today was something that was really attractive.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything everyone said. For me personally, I heard about Drew like through Prime. I like went to like a medical school fair and I met some UC San Diego Prime students actually, and then I learned that there was Prime at all of the UCs, and I was like, well, I want to go back to LA. So when I was looking at the Prime website and then found out about Drew and how they basically have a similar mission, but like, like Michaela was saying, was grounded in the Watts riots, and you kind of learn more about their history, and you're like, wow, like I didn't even know that this private school was like sitting here and doing all of that. So applying to that, I think what really like made me go, yes, I have to go to Drew was I think the pre-interview social. I don't think I'd ever walked into a room, any interview, anywhere, and seen that many people of color like all applying to med school, all doing the thing, all, like that was their goal, and they all had the same exact goal as you, right? Like when you walk in, like the perk of having such a mission driven place is like knowing that everyone in that room feels the same as you. So I think walking into that interview social and just seeing everyone, it was like so inspiring. And then you go to Drew, you see the campus, and you just see how much they care about what they do and how hands-on everyone was, like seeing the upperclassmen that came in and just seeing the kind of rapport that they had with our deans. You don't see that at other medical schools. You just don't get that same feel. And I think it was then where I knew like, yeah, I need to go to Drew because this is where you're going to feel the most supported, right? Because you get that like small fish in a big pond feeling sometimes at UCLA, but you feel kind of like really at home and kind of like more in a safe aquarium when you're at Drew. And I think that part is like really special, and being able to go both places for that.
So I want to add on to that, and I completely agree with everything that was said. But for me, I mentioned I was originally like a pure MD PhD applicant, and then I saw Drew's mission and I applied. And I fell in love with the program during my interview. I didn't go to the social, unfortunately. But I remember the moment I walked in for the interview, I was greeted like, "Hi, Mildred, how are you? How was your flight?" Everyone's like, "Whoa, like, you know who I am? I didn't introduce myself. Like, how do you know who I am?" And it's like, they really look into the applicants and they care and they want to make you feel welcomed. And I felt that way anytime I was in any type of Drew, like email contacts, the interview, second look. And yeah, so I really like the administration. Like Dean Kalmus is wonderful. Everyone else there is wonderful. And when I was doing my interview and I was talking to all the other applicants, they felt like friends. It felt like I was at home, and it just felt like I belonged there. All my other interviews, everyone kind of didn't really want to talk about themselves. They were just kind of like, "Oh, I did this and I want to come to this school." And in Drew, it was like, "Oh, my passion is I want to help this population because of this." So like we all struggled, but we all succeeded, and we all got to this point, and we all have goals, and we're going to work for them. And I didn't get that anywhere else. I'm like, okay, here it's like everyone shares my mission, everyone shares similar struggles, and it felt like a family. So like I declined my other MD PhD acceptances. I came to Drew and I applied to MSTP here. So yeah, Drew is just it's a family. It's wonderful.
Beautifully put, everybody. And just to add to you, Mildred, I guess in terms of choosing a school, there are a lot of criteria you can follow. Whatever floats your boat. If a research intensive school is for you, that's high in your criteria. That's all good. If a mission-based school is high in your criteria, it's all good. But I hope that you guys also take gut feeling into it, and as well as like when you're in all your interview, breakout rooms or whatnot, ask yourself, do you see yourself being friends with the students that you're interviewing with? Like, what is your gut feeling telling you? And personally, for me, like, my gut was like, go to this school. Like, I had the same sentiments as everybody here. And I guess that just goes to show how much we love Drew and the Drew program and how much it means to us. But sorry, on that note, I want to sidetrack a little bit off topic of our next question and ask you all, personally for me, I was quite confused with this question, so I'm going to bring it up. But what does it mean to be a student at both Drew and UCLA? How does that work? Are you taking classes elsewhere compared to the other UCLA students? What's the difference?
That's a good question. I can give like my perspective of like MS1, MS2, and maybe Michaela, you can, the exact specifics of 3 and 4. But for 1 and 2, for the most part, like you do all your classes at UCLA. Most people kind of live closer to Westwood as well, just because of our classes being there. All of our so like selectives and all those different things are in different locations depending on which one you choose. We all have to do a Drew selective our first year, and Dr. Kalmez and deans and speakers all come to Geffen, so we also have that in Westwood. For the most part, I think a lot of the Drew specific things come in 3rd year because we have Drew specific rotations at certain sites that are usually in more underserved areas, as well as having like a research project that we have to finish by the end of our 4 years, sort of as a thesis of sorts. And then I think the part about Drew that's more like extracurricular is just how can you get involved in the community, whether that's through Project Santa Claus that we have, or doing Partners for Progress, which is working with high schoolers from the King Drew Magnet High School. I think it's more about how involved you want to get into the Drew community, how involved you want to be in that area. You can make yourself be at Drew as much or as little as you want to be.
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to 3rd and 4th year. Sorry, my partner's dog is currently drinking water, so that's what you're hearing right now. So for 3rd and 4th year, like you were saying, we do a number of rotations that are in Drew specific sites. So for example, our ambulatory rotation is at MLK, which is the hospital that's across the street from Drew. And we also do a specific rotation in psychiatry that's at a mental health facility in South LA called Kedron. And then for a number of my other rotations, I did most of mine at the UCLA affiliated county hospitals. So I did most of mine at Olive View Hospital, which is in the Valley, which serves a really high need population, a large Spanish speaking undocumented population. So I was able to get that exposure while I was there. I think for me, the biggest differences though, is that we get everything that UCLA students receive. And so it's like, I had pretty much all the same access to all of the same resources, the research. So the year I did of research was a funded research year through UCLA. But in addition to that, there's like Drew specific mentorship that we receive. There's also Drew specific funding that you can receive for various things. And so I will say that it honestly just felt like an additional support network in addition to all of the resources that were available to me as a UCLA student. And then I also did rotations at Reagan, which is like UCLA's hospital as well. So it was really like a diverse array of training sites, which I also think is a really big advantage to this program, is that you can train at an institution like Reagan that is very like research heavy, an academic institution where you see very different things than when you're at the county versus like a Kaiser versus a community hospital. So really was all over Los Angeles for my rotations and got a lot of exposure to various health systems that I think is really important exposure, especially as like going into the residency process and thinking about what types of programs I want to train at. I feel like it would be pretty hard to make that decision if I hadn't had that exposure.
Thank you. So key thing there, you get the as a student in a Drew UCLA program, you get the resources of both Drew and UCLA. And we all know resources are everything. So there's 2 sets of resources, which is amazing. Thank you. All right, so next question is, so So what are your career plans, and how does Drew help you achieve your career plans?
Okay, so I think it's pretty early on for me to really commit to a career plan, but I really do love obstetrics and gynecology. And as an undergrad, I had a lot of exposure to OB-GYN, and I kind of fell in love with it. So I think I came into medical school really loving that already. But what I really like about Drew is that particularly I decided to go to Drew because I really wanted to serve underserved communities. Like I want to serve the community that I grew up in. I want things to be better for people that identify like myself. Um, and I feel like Drew allows you to really be exposed to that early on. So I'm excited for the OB-GYN rotation that Drew is going to provide because it's going to be in the community that I hopefully will be able to serve one day. And so I think with Drew, it really gives you access to any specialty and any career plan that you have in mind, but with that additional like lens. Like if you're really interested in serving underserved communities and you're nervous about going somewhere else and not getting that exposure, then Drew can kind of guarantee that you will. And so it really just um, provides me with, hands-on, direct experience to something that ultimately I want to do. So I would rather have that experience now when I'm in medical school than, later as a resident and then realize maybe it's not something I want to do, or maybe it is. But it gives you that opportunity to learn early what you want to do and expose you to the communities that you want to serve.
So I'm probably the closest as far as my decision-making process surrounding this question. So for me, I touched on it a bit. I'm applying in obstetrics and gynecology right now. And one thing that I thought that was great that Drew offered is during my first and second years, like going in, I had an idea that I was interested in reproductive health. So I knew that that was something I wanted to explore. And I was assigned a preceptor during the first and second years who was an OBGYN, who was a former Drew student. And so I was able to gain experience with her during first and second years, like doing pap smears, counseling women about their pregnancy options and birth control options and things like that at the clinics that she worked in. Also got to scrub in on some C-sections, things like that. But for me, it was really great to not only have that experience, but to also learn from someone who had trained in this program and who was committed to serving the populations that I wanted to serve in the future. So for me, that was really special. I think also just in general, Drew is just supportive. Like I've applied for a position. I'm currently on the National Board of Directors with Medical Students for Choice, which is an organization that's dedicated to providing abortion education within and family planning education within medical schools. It's something that's often missing from the curricula, and also providing students with a platform in order to serve as advocates as far as increasing access for their patient populations. And Dean Kalmas was my reference for that. So like, just, in terms of things that you want to explore and things you're interested in, there's someone at Drew who is going to be there to go to bat for you and who's going to support you in obtaining that. And I think that I'm seeing that even more now as I'm going through like this whole process of getting to the next step. It's become very clear like how important and how helpful and how useful that support really is.
Thank you. I think that's just one of the many advantages of having such a small cohort within such a large cohort that is DGSOM, the David Geffen School of Medicine. Everything is just a lot more personalized. And again, everybody at Drew knows you by name. And it's like, you're like, wow, like it's a great feeling. And then as you go on, you'll get to know the Drew office and Drew by name as well. All right. So up next, we're going to move to some questions that were pre-sent by you all when you all registered for this event. And after that, we'll open the floor up for any other questions that you have right now. But the first question, which is a common question, basically, how have you been involved in underserved communities during your time at in med school? I know, Nonya, you mentioned Project Santa Claus and P4P, but if anybody can elaborate on things they have done thus far in their med school career.
I can go. So for me, I think one of the main things that I did is I wanted to get involved with a community. So I looked for any type of student organization. Typically, medical schools have student organizations, and you can choose different ones. So one of the first ones that I joined was the mobile clinic, which is usually you go, I think, I don't remember how often, it's like it's been a while, but usually a couple of like medical students and some attendings go along with like, I think like social workers to help homeless populations in LA. So that, ever since I was in Berkeley for undergrad, I did a little bit of volunteering at the Berkeley Free Clinic. So I wanted to continue getting involved providing care for the homeless population. So that was one. And I also got involved in LMSA as the LGBTQIA representative. So for that, in addition to my position, I got involved in anything that LMSA was doing, which includes the Lenox Health Fair. And that, like, similar to that, there's a health fair where we provide services to the Lenox community. And as LGBTQIA representative, I kind of wanted to bring a little bit more of attention to the particular LGBTQIA community within the Latino population. So kind of we had like a series, like a week series where I had speakers come in and they just gave talks about their experiences as Latinos and how they help the LGBTQ community. And I was also involved in the infectious disease interest group. So for that, I partnered with LMSA as an LMSA person to have a vaccine booth within the Lenox Health Fairs. And there we provided information on vaccines for like in Spanish and English to the communities. And we offered to kind of translate and explain and tell them about the importance and what it means. And now as a PhD student, I have a lot more free time. I guess in a sense, not too much, but I have more control over my schedule there. And so I'm not too involved with the medical school, but I have been involved in mentorship itself. So mentorship within the MSDP program, mentorship within PhD, and a lot of outreach efforts. So through that, I've worked with LCCM, which is Latinx Chica Next for Community Medicine at UCLA, where I actually took in like 2 undergrads so I could mentor them in my lab. I kind of like unofficially kind of giving them advice for graduate school and medical school. So now that I'm in this position where I've done both like the medical and the graduate school path, I've done kind of mentorship and outreach and trying to increase diversity within all of my programs in medical school, PhD, and the MD PhD.
I guess I can answer this question too. So in addition to the clinical opportunities that I already spoke about, my research that I did for a year was actually in partnership with this specialized juvenile delinquency court that works specifically with young women who have been impacted by sex trafficking. So essentially there was, and the court is actually around the corner from Drew, like it's in Compton, it's like less than 10 minutes away. And so the judge that was there essentially saw that there was a need amongst, she kept seeing like these young people coming in her court, and then either through self-disclosure or through like conversations, she found that there was a high prevalence of youth who'd experienced sexual exploitation. And so she identified, okay, this is something that I feel like we need to be proactive about combating and be proactive in providing these youth with the specialized resources that they need and deserve. And so she worked with my project lead, the principal investigator of the project, essentially to work to identify their needs through their own words and then come up with solutions health-wise as far as ways that the court could intervene in the services that they could provide. So I think at UCLA in general and at Drew, there are a number of different researchers who are working in issues surrounding health equity. You have to be proactive about finding those out, but really, I mean, it honestly generally just takes an email. But I think for those of us who see research as a form of advocacy and see research as something that we want to do, or we're working with the communities that we hope to serve one day, I think that there are a number of different opportunities to get involved. So
Lovely. Oh, sorry, Alex, go for it.
I was gonna say, funny enough, I think I've been more involved this year than last year, even with COVID going on. It's actually made it a lot easier because you can do everything virtually. Something that I really enjoyed, like during my time in research and even undergrad, was mentorship. It's kind of like Mildred has talked about, just trying to increase diversity, as well as just like helping those who are maybe first gen, or individuals who have historically been maybe difficult for them to get to med school. But I've been able to like have talks with my local high schools and just kind of like talking to them about my story and kind of taking in questions from them. And that to me is something that's just really fulfilling, because in my area, it's really rare to see anyone go to med school or any sort of professional school. So hearing not only their very like interesting questions, but they also have these questions that are just like for fun, right? Like I had questions about Animal Crossing and like what tree I started with. And so not only is it cool to just provide mentorship to them, but also just have like fun conversations about basketball and other random things, just so, because I think it's important for them to be able to see themselves as someone who can get to this point. So I've really enjoyed that aspect so far.
Oh wow, thank you for that. That was lovely. That was lovely. I was switching off topic a little. I just want to make a note. So we received a lot of questions regarding, interviews and such, like the application process. And due to time restraints, we can't really touch upon it now. But Med Mentors at UCLA, their social media sites on Instagram and Facebook, as well as their website, they have tons of resources and a lot of other talks that address, how to be the most competitive applicant you can be. So I'll just add that, social media link here. So please check it out if you get the chance. But I do have one question, I guess, that kind of encapsulates that those broad range of questions. And that is, how do you stand out as an applicant? In general, I guess you guys can answer that, or maybe specific to Drew. But feel free to answer it whichever way you want.
I feel like this is like always a hard question for med students to answer, because it's like, I don't know why I got in. I hoped I did something that stood out, but like what part did, who knows? So I feel like for me, like at least what I try to tell people is just, we throw out that word passion a lot, but I truly do think that like you just have to be passionate about the things that you're doing. I think that we fall into these like traps, I guess, of like trying to be cookie cutter in terms of like, oh, they're going to expect this, they want this, they want this. And like, don't get me wrong, like, yeah, you should have clinical experience because they want to know that you've seen what it means to like be a doctor, but like it doesn't have to be the exact same type, right? It doesn't have to be scribing. It doesn't necessarily have to be shadowing like 200 hours. There's so many ways to get clinical experience, whether it was like things like what Alex said, he was going down to Mexico and like translating people. That's clinical experience. Like you got to witness the patient doctor interaction, right? And I think at the end of the day, that's what they want. But outside of that, like anything that you enjoy doing and you can talk about passionately and say what you learned about it and say like why it connects to you is like all that really matters. I think I spent some interviews like never really talking about like my medical things. I talked about other things that I just really had passions for, and people saw in my application and were like, wow, that's interesting. I just want to talk to you about it. So I think just like not being afraid to do what you want through undergrad, do what you want after, and when the time comes, you won't, it won't even be hard to shape it into how you got into medicine, because you would have always been doing what you're passionate about, what your heart told you to do, and you'll kind of see how it got you there, you know? So I think in terms of standing out, just do things you want to do. They can tell when you didn't actually enjoy doing it, and spend some time thinking about how it impacted you. Because even if you were passionate about something and you can only talk about like, I guess like a checklist of things that you did or how much money it made and stuff like that, that's not really great. You kind of need to go one step further and say, and this is the impact it had. So yeah.
Just to echo that, I think um, one way really is to just kind of be honest, like not just with the day of your interview, but like with your journey to medical school. So it's like if you didn't like scribing because you know, then don't scribe anymore. Like go spend your time doing something else. That doesn't mean that you're not going to be a great doctor. You're not going to love medicine. It's just like that's just not where you want to spend your time. And so really going through my journey, I dedicated my time doing things that I enjoyed. So like I, you know, kind of wanted to tip my toes into like education and realized I really, really loved it. And then actually ended up working as a middle school teacher. And so you want to spend time doing things you enjoy and really give it like your journey to medicine shouldn't be like you're checking off things off a list. It should be like, I love to do these things and I think I'm going to be a good doctor because of all these things that have confirmed that from my journey through medicine. And so when you're, you know, talking to someone about that, it's not like, you know, you're not like checking, you know, showing them like I checked off all the boxes. You're just naturally talking about things that you really, really love. And I think some people sometimes like I spent a lot of time because I did reapply in my post back year was really focused on like why do you want to do this and how can you verbalize that? Because we all really have, you know, we all love medicine for different reasons, but like if you don't know how to tell someone that into words that makes sense and like can really shine through, then you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. So really spend your time like having those conversations with yourself of like if I had to tell someone tomorrow like why I want to do this, how would I say that? And so really having those opportunities to practice, you know, a lot of my conversations with myself were like when I was in the shower or like when I was driving, like really just kind of thinking and reflecting. And you don't want that to be the day of your interview. You want that to really, you know, treat this as like a year of self-reflection. That's really the application year for me was very much like reflecting on the things I've done and why those things continue to motivate me to do medicine. And then that I just kind of replicated that on my interview day. Um, yeah, I think it's very organic too.
All right, thank you. Thank you. That was lovely. Oh, sorry, I didn't even see the, the question and answer tab. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a few questions from our audience. The first is, give me one second. All right.
I think some have been answered from the Q&A, but I just wanted to double check.
I can't open mine right now. Do you mind actually reading it for me, Nonye?
Yeah, I think the first one was, is it possible to learn each student's applicant's theme as well and how their activities and personal statement correlate to those? But I feel like we've maybe sort of answered that. Um, Someone we wanted to ask Alex, so I don't know if you want to answer about how did you describe your depressive disorder that caused poor academic to admissions committees if they asked? And if not, would you recommend trying to explain poor grades in undergrad during secondaries?
Yeah, I can answer this. So, like I said, I was in a post-bac program, and so when I was applying, my coordinators helped me out a little bit with my essays, and we had this whole conversation of whether I should like talk about it, not talk about it, and ultimately it came out down to like a personal preference. So for me, my depressive episode kind of came out between my like sophomore junior year, and it had to do with like coming out as a LGBTQ individual in a very conservative Hispanic community and like upbringing, and that was very difficult for me. And I thought that that was kind of vital to my story in many ways, because I like that was why I had these bad grades. That was kind of my explanation, and it really was like if I mean it was so easy to talk about in interviews. I did get asked a couple times, and it kind of ended up talking about taking a turn about talking about my life and like my upbringing. And so instead of having those hypothetical ethical questions that some people get at interviews, it was more about like my upbringing and sort of more interesting questions about me, and that made it easier to answer. So ultimately, I think actually going through that experience has made me. I wrote about this because I think it's made me so much better understanding and like empathetic towards individuals with mental health, disorders. Like I can, when if I ever see a patient, I mean, I haven't had this happen, but I've had someone in my family go through a major depressive episode, and I can see, I was able to see the signs and symptoms and have those kind of intervention skills that maybe I wouldn't have unless unless I had gone through it. So I think if anything, it made me maybe someone who's better prepared to handle that in the future. And I wrote about that in my essays, and I think it resonated well with whoever, and clearly resonated with Drew. So, or else I wouldn't be here. But ultimately, I think it's up to you. I was always told, like, if you don't have a good reason for your bad grades, don't write about them. But if you have like a good reason, and it's something that has influenced your decision in medicine in many ways, or like has played a part and role in how you've grown as a person, then I think it's vital to write about.
Thank you for sharing, Alex. Sorry, no, I actually realized that the screen popped up on my other screen. I just wasn't looking up. But I can ask the next question. So this is from Mildred, and I think you answered it, but feel free to add some more. Have you applied to other MSTP programs as well? And also for the non-traditional students who have only had a few months exposure to basic science, do you think that doing research during post-bac would be enough?
So I did apply to several MSTP programs, but most of them ended up, I guess my acceptances were in New York and Boston. So the only acceptance that I got in California was Drew, because I wasn't accepted into the MSTP, like original UCLA MSTP program. And, when I got my offer from Drew, I informed, like Dean Kalmus and the office that, I'm interested in doing an MD PhD, and I have acceptances already, but not from UCLA. So I'm conflicted about, where I should go. And, the conflict was, MD PhD programs, it's fully funded. You don't have to pay for tuition, you get a stipend. So it's like financial, and then it's far from home, but then Drew, like the mission, the people, and, I'm from California. And, when I told that to the office, they're like, you know what, we have one student in the Drew program who applied as an internal applicant into MSTP, and they connected me with him, and he started helping me like that day. That day it was like phone call, boom, talk to this person. He called me, he gave me advice. He's like, girl, this is what you need to do. You follow these steps and you'll get into the program. And, I came in telling them knowing that I wanted to do an MD PhD program, and I was supported up until I was accepted. And even now in my graduate school, if I have any issues, if I just want to talk, it's like, Dr. Kalmus. So yeah, yes, I guess to answer the question, yes, I did apply to other MSTP programs, but I ultimately wanted to come to Drew, and they helped me get into the MD PhD program here.
Thank you. And does anybody have a response to the post-bac question, the second question, the post-bac question?
Yeah, I can, maybe even Mildred could probably add on to this. So I actually took, like I said, 4 years off, but I took 2 years of just like working in a lab as a technician. And I think, looking back, I don't think even a year would have been enough experience. I think it really took that even 2+ years, right? Because I already had a couple of years in undergrad, just because it takes time to learn techniques and how to do good science. I'm sure Mildred, you can probably add on to this, being a PhD now. But at the end of the, once I was finished with everything, I was able to get my first author paper done just because I had that, experience. It took so much time. The basic science paper takes so much longer, I think, than maybe other types of papers. And I don't think a few months would be enough. I think you really need to immerse yourself for a few years. But Mildred, maybe you can add on to that.
So I guess for the amount of research you need really depends on what you're using it for. So if you want to figure out if research is for you, you probably need to spend more time in the lab and get your own project and get involved with, as Alice was saying, like kind of trying to get published. If you want to do research just to expose yourself and get a little bit of experience, then maybe kind of a few hours as an undergrad, learning techniques, kind of going to lab meeting, that would be okay. But if you want to do, graduate school, that you probably would need a little bit more exposure and have experience doing your own project, learning more techniques, kind of talking to the PI, learning how a paper is written and the whole process of publishing. If you want to go into an MD PhD program, those are typically really competitive. So you need a lot more experience in the lab. And I think now it's getting more competitive. So you preferably any publications. And publications take longer, or if you're lucky and you get thrown into a project that's running smoothly and the PI likes you and you get listed as an author. So it really depends on what you want to do the research for, but hopefully that answered the question.
All right, thank you. So we're running short on time. So there are a couple more questions. One is asked if the panelists would be comfortable adding their contact information to the doc. So I know for all the panelists, if you're comfortable, feel free to add your contact information to that document. And then the audience, have access to it to reach out to the panelists. And then the question after that is specifically for Mildred about her PhD and like the finances of it. So I don't know if that's more of a personal question than Mildred, because I know Mildred, you included your email on that doc, if I'm not mistaken. So feel free to reach out to Mildred regarding that question. But before we go, and I want to respect everybody's time, last question kind of is advice. Do you have any advice for our audience, or maybe what do you wish you had done when you applied to med school X amount of years ago?
For me, I think the advice I have is really something that I'm trying to implement right now as I'm going through the residency application process. And that really is that this whole process, like being a doctor, this is a marathon, it is not a sprint. And I think that there can be like a tendency to want to just get to the next step as quickly as possible. But I really do encourage students, if they're able to take time away from medicine or take gap years if you're able to do it. I think for me, during the time that I was able to do that, it really provided some necessary clarity for me. And then I also think it gave perspective that many students wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to develop if they had gone just like straight through. Also, that being said, though, I think that there are a number of different avenues to medical school, and I have classmates with such a wide array of experiences that I feel like just don't be discouraged if your path isn't linear, because at the end of the day, I think it actually makes you a better physician in the long run, and you'll better be able to serve your patients in the long run.
Also, if it helps, as someone who didn't take a gap year, I also agree. Take time off. You'll be less burned out.
I just want to add, like, I know you mentioned like when you're applying, I think it's a very anxiety driven process. I remember like just waiting for emails, constantly checking all the time, and just noting that to not compare yourself to others, because I'm sure you'll have people you know who get interviews early. Everyone's on their own timeline. This kind of has to do with like taking gap years. I mean, I took 4 years, and I remember like being a pre-med and being told like you should apply right after, undergrad or like during undergrad. And like I do not regret those 4 years. I had so much fun and like life experiences that have actually helped me a lot in med school. So this is why, like, take your time. Everyone's on their own timeline, and do something fun like during your gap year. Because if you just sit there and are waiting for emails all day, you're just gonna get very anxious. So do something fun. Go for a run. Play some games. Dance. Whatever makes you happy. But definitely do something that you enjoy to kill some time.
One thing I always tell people, and like COVID obviously changes a lot of that, but like don't be afraid to ask for things, especially like once you've gotten in. Like if you want to go to a second look, ask them if they'll pay for it. I got like 3 or 4 schools to do that just by asking, and they wouldn't have advertised it, right? The same with like financial aid. If you want more money, like at this point they want you. They're not going to not accept you because you asked them this question. And I think that's also true of just like the whole process. If you have a question about something, ask them. I think people get worried that's going to look bad on their application if they ask like AdCom a question, and that's just not the case. Like they want you, so they want to make sure that you have all the information you need to make the decision that you can. So that's one thing that I would say.
All right, I guess I'm gonna add a little bit to this. So again, my piece of advice is your journey alone. And it's easier said than done, definitely. And I feel like in med school, and I'm sure in the future it's gonna be like this, but try not to, what Alex said, compare yourself to others, because again, it's your journey on your own time. and I'm a non-traditional student myself. I took maybe one or two, depending on how do you classify my schooling. I took
A whole pharmacist, guys. She got, what is it called? PharmD before she came here.
yes, I'm a career switcher as well. But yeah, again, your journey is your journey alone. It's your story. And I really try to do this now, even in med school, and I hope to do it in the future, but surround yourself with positivity, right? Try to literally shoot out all that negative, because that's just going to bring about anxiety and comparisons. Honestly, like, it's surround yourself with a community. And for me, Drew is my community. Like, I feel comfortable, like, it's like family with my Drew peers. But wherever you go, wherever you land throughout your whole application process, know that it's your journey and everything is on your time. And only you has you're the only one with your story. So just keep that in mind. And then anybody have anything else to say before we sign off? All right, I want to thank you so very much, all 5 panelists. I really do appreciate the time you spent here. And also I want to thank the audience for listening. Best of luck to you all in your application process. It's a long road. As Michaela said, it is a marathon. So please pace yourself. But yeah, best of luck to you all, and have a great night. Yeah, have a great evening. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, you guys.